Hello and welcome to the Stories of Innovation, a podcast by World Vision International Nepal, and I'm your host Utsav Karel. Today we have got Max Vieille, who is the Global Director of Response Innovation Lab, and we'll be exploring quite a lot around leading innovation in complex humanitarian settings. All right, Max, welcome to the Stories of Innovation.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
That's brilliant, because we have been so much trying to get you on this show, and finally we have managed to make you work on Sunday to get you in this recording. Thank you for, giving us time on Sunday as well to, talk about some of the inspiring things you guys have been doing, as well as, promoting the culture of innovation in different countries.
Innovation never rests. So happy to join whenever.
That's the statement we'll be following in this episode. So that's great. So, Max, tell us more around Response Innovation Lab, like how it came into existence and why Response Innovation Lab is something that all the humanitarian innovators need to look out for.
Well, thanks. And actually, this is really... the question is interesting, but where it's coming from even more so, because the roots of Response Innovation Lab are Nepal. I mean, that's right. Where the idea kind of germinated in 2015 for the terrible earthquake. And there's a woman in particular, her name is Jennifer McCann-Weil, who was working with World Vision at the time. She was leading the response. And I think she wasn't alone in thinking that, but I think she was really the first to act on it. Hashtag girl power. She took the leap and figured out that, there's these, you've got the settings in these humanitarian responses where you have this very kind of, the same kind of actors that always get together in times of emergencies, and they, international NGOs, UN, government, and they work closely together, but they work in these kind of silos. With the humanitarian clusters, the NGO working groups, and they do great work. But it's really hard if you're coming from outside of that system to contribute to if you're a local social enterprise or tech startup, and you think you have an idea, you just can't walk into these places. So her idea was to actually create that open space to find a way to have these people from the humanitarian side who are struggling with really critical challenges that aren't being answered by the usual way of working, and to connect them with people with ideas, and from all walks of life, all types of profiles. And they started opening up that space in Kathmandu, and it worked. People, they built it, and then people came, and ideas were hatched and tested and piloted, and some of them scaled quite successfully. So that then inspired many of us who heard about this. And to her credit, Jenny did a great job of going out and telling people about it. I was working at Save the Children at the time in the humanitarian department of Save US. And I heard about her pitch and became very intrigued. And a group of us from other NGOs, Oxfam, Civic, George Washington University at that time came together. And we decided to try this out at a global scale, to try it in multiple locations and to design kind of a system around it. So that's the sort of origin story of Response Innovation Lab.
So the piloting happened in Nepal and the scale-up happened all over the world, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the pilot, that was the first place where, I think at the time, too, it's important to step back and realize at that time, this was sort of 2015, there was starting, innovation was starting to become kind of a big thing in the humanitarian world,
right.
But it was happening at the global level. Like, people were setting these global labs that were going to try to fix problems in Geneva, in New York, in places like that, in Munich, and the idea was to try to achieve maximum impact, or to kind of steer towards a one-size-fits-all solution. To one shelter design that was going to work in all refugee settlements, right. And so on. And this was definitely a different path that we were taking. We were looking to localize the process, to not the ambition of solving a whole kind of global problem, but to really solve what was happening in a particular location at a particular time. And then, if things worked, then perhaps there was scaling potential. But for us, what mattered was to solve a problem right there and then.
Oh, brilliant. So now, there are quite a lot of labs, right? So tell us more about, because it's in Uganda, it's in Somalia, it's in Iraq, the new in Gaza is coming as well. So tell us what Global Response Innovation Lab has been doing currently.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been basically for the last 5 years or so, we've been testing this model. So we designed this way of trying to address these challenges at the response level, bringing in all the different sort of demand side for innovation and the supply side, regardless of where that was coming from, and to try to actually solve problems and to put solutions on a path to national scale. So we've opened these platforms. Yes, as you mentioned, we opened in Jordan, we opened in Puerto Rico, in Uganda, in Somalia, and in Iraq. And I know you've already had you have our colleague from Iraq as part of this podcast series. And so these platforms started to test the system out and to see are we able to, is there demand for what we're doing? I think that was the first question. Like, are people interested in this kind of brokering, system where we try to connect them with solutions, or we try to, connect solution holders with people with a market essentially. And it turned out, there was definitely huge demand. I think it took us a while to figure out how to meet that demand. And I think we're still, we're still a startup ourselves, still figuring things out. But we've gotten to a point, I think, in all of these places where we are able to translate that demand into something meaningful and to actually get new partnerships that come out of it, to spread information about this humanitarian innovation marketplace that's then helping people kind of make their own, make their own connections and move ahead.
Right. So talking about connection, you mentioned when you were giving the backstory behind the Response Innovation Lab that like different actors in the humanitarian settings were used to work in silos. So connecting them was one of the founding ethos of Innovation Lab, right? So tell us more about the matchmaking, because this is one of the brilliant way you guys are connecting the local innovators with the communities as well as with the donors. So how does this process works, and like what are some of the values that is created in the process?
I think it's a good question, because I think matchmaking, we've actually expanded, I think, the concept quite a bit from the initial design. The initial design was a very kind of narrow process where we would have one organization come to us and say, we've got this problem. We would work with the organization to define the problem a little bit more precisely in order to make it easier to find, a solution that actually would connect or connect, a multiplicity of solutions that could solve it. And then we would do research to find these potential solutions. We would assess them and then would present them back to the challenge holder for them to make a decision. But I think what's grown out of it is we've done, and it worked. I mean, initially we had a lot of interested parties. People appreciated the kind of reports that we were giving them and the options. But as you mentioned, at that point, it didn't have a lot of community interfacing with the community, and it was missing a kind of a human-centered design element to it. So what I think it's evolved quite a bit to the point where we do Matchmaker now, but as part of a much longer process where we do convene different stakeholders together to first analyze the problem collectively and to make sure that there is kind of this wider demand for a particular solution. And I think that helps quite a bit the people on the innovation side realize that, yes, there is a market, there is potential for them to grow their solution, whether it's hardware, software, service, whatever it may be. It's important for them to know that multiple agencies are interested. And then we also incorporate into that process a lot of human design thinking and trainings for humanitarian organizations who they're catching up, but they don't always have that sort of ingrained. So to get them to communicate with communities ahead of time, as opposed to what often happens is kind of post facto, like, we've designed a program, we're implementing it, now please tell us, are you happy with it? What changes can we make? We're trying to get that now where the communities are involved in understanding the challenge that's trying to be addressed, to make sure that from their perspective, it actually, resonates. And then particularly when it comes to innovations, for them to have a say in what innovations they think are going to be more helpful, more feasible. And so now that process is a much longer, kind of more comprehensive process. And I think for us, it's been kind of one of the key lessons learned is time. I think there's this perception, right, that everything innovation related is fast, move fast and break things. In the humanitarian world, I think we want to flip that. We're basically moving carefully and we're building things. So it's a different approach, but when you do it right, I think that's where you have a higher chance of actually succeeding and getting solutions that don't just work for the implement, but that work for the communities as well.
Perfect. So it's an iterative process. We learn from the process and we grow, especially in the humanitarian world, because there are so many stakeholders we need to look into. Talking about the stakeholders, because one of the beauty of having you in this podcast series is you have got this bird's eye view of different labs, right? So like, how do you see, like local innovation emerging over the last 5-10 years? Like especially because I know, like for example, for Somalia, like there are different challenges and some local solutions are required. In Uganda, there's a different context. In Iraq, it's a different. In Jordan, it's a different. In Nepal, it's different, right? So, how do you see this, innovation scene emerging in the recent years?
I mean, to me, that was one of the biggest shocks in working across these different contexts. Like, I was not expecting this wealth of talent, of entrepreneurship, of social entrepreneurship in particular, coming from these countries. I mean, Somalia, for many of us who, I had been, but strictly, when you work in the humanitarian side, you tend to look at what's not working in the country. You tend to focus on the areas where there is, the water system isn't working, or your schools are closed, and so on. And sometimes you lose the bigger picture that, these societies in what we call fragile contexts, tend to be extremely resourceful. Like as a result of having so many hardships, like people find a way to define new solutions. They are able to move things forward on their own terms. And so to me, like when we're doing some of the mapping that we do, seeing in Uganda, for instance, I think we're now well past 700 separate innovations, and most of them local. All the solutions that we're scaling in Somalia come from local sources or next door in Kenya, but and the same thing in Iraq. Iraq kind of took initially, as I think as Doha probably mentioned, like they were working at first with a kind of an even mix of like trying to introduce foreign innovations into Iraq, but now they've realized that there's so much potential in that country. So that's been incredible. Like we build our systems to sort of try to be both, like working with international solutions and national ones. I mean, now the focus is clearly on local solutions, because it's not just a quantity, it's also the quality, how, especially on the technology side, there's this democratization that's happened where it is, anybody with, a good sort of, with a good brain and minimum access to connectivity can teach themselves to code, can access a whole range of library, of ideas and training material, and then they can build things that are just as good as from anywhere in the world. And and we see this over and over again, and it's incredibly encouraging.
Absolutely. Since like a lot of stakeholders are required to be on board in this process, right? Because we are trying to create a value, and you already mentioned about the process of using human-centric design in the process so that we connect different stakeholders together. I'm more curious around, because you do a lot of partnership with donor communities, and innovation is such a complex topic, right? Because we all have got a different understanding of innovation. If you ask me about what innovation means to you, then I've got a completely different way of expressing. That's why in this podcast, we try to talk to donors. We try to talk to, people like yourself who is doing more around, bridging the gap between the community, the local labs, as well as, with the donor community. So how do you, articulate innovation to these big partners like donors? Because everyone has got a different understanding. That's why we say it, it's like the story of a blind man and elephant. And that's why, everyone has got a different way of understanding innovation. So share us, some of your secret recipe of, articulating innovation and trying to get them on board.
Yeah, I think the secret sometimes is to use as many buzzwords as possible, but I try to refrain from that. I think for us, what's been successful, because I think there is a lot also of innovation sometimes is oversold. Or like you said, sometimes some people use it to mean absolutely anything. So for us, I think what's been helpful is really focus on challenges and to link it to problems that need solving. I've heard from, I don't know if it was a TED Talk or somebody in the investment world saying people fall in love with a problem, not a solution. And I think that's true. That's what people care about. It's they want to do good. They want to change something. They want to create change for the better. And so if you can articulate that, and I think, everything in the humanitarian community is so, focalized on problems, and, everything comes from needs assessments, from situation analyses, and these kind of, documents. So they're very aware of the problem as being at the center. And the way we sort of talk about innovation is a way to solve challenges, not the whole thing. And I think this is also where sometimes there is, a bit of a asymmetry, I guess, in expectations. Like, there's a lot of attention to like moonshot type of innovations that are going to solve like world hunger.
Right.
It's amazing if we can find that. The reality is, like, you have a higher chance of solving the problem piece by piece. So instead of looking at hunger as a one single issue, can you dig down and say, well, maybe one of the problems is getting goods from the production area to the market with less loss, with fewer loss of perishables. There you can find a solution, and that solution can innovate around the cold chain, or making transportation faster or cheaper. And then that doesn't solve 100% of the problem, but if you solve 5% of world hunger, that's still absolutely massive. So I think that's the way we've tried to do it. I mean, clearly you often get people that see opportunities, that want to put, like, we get a lot, I'm sure you do too. It's that, well, we got to use blockchain, right? Like, we got to use that. It's, like, why don't you use the AI in your programming? And that's great, but again, why? Like, the question of why do you want to use that? What's it expected to achieve? And how are you going to measure success? If you have a challenge, it allows you to measure success. To what degree have you solved the problem? If it's this open-ended thing, like, let's try AI and see what happens, it becomes really hard to say, well, has it worked? Hasn't it worked? If you haven't set, a clear goal, in front of you.
Perfect. Because I was about to ask you something around measuring the success, especially from the innovation perspective, right? So you have really extensive knowledge and background in this area of monitoring and evaluation, and we always seek ideas and support from you every time when you ponder upon, like, how do we measure innovation? Like, how do we see the effectiveness of innovation? So tell us more around, measuring innovation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating field, and I like you mentioned, I come from sort of the monitoring and evaluation side of things on the development and humanitarian world, but it's a very different space when you look at innovation, and you kind of have to marry systems from very different systems. So the first thing, actually, we try to measure at RIL. We work on two levels when it comes to generating evidence. One is obviously on the innovation themselves. Are they working? Do they have the potential to scale? Is there evidence to kind of back further investments or further scaling? But the other one that's less, that fewer people talk about, and that's harder in some ways, is measuring the ecosystem.
Right.
Like, to what degree are we working in a functional ecosystem or market? Do the players know each other? Do we see kind of interactions from key? Do the investors know about the startups and the enterprises that are coming from there? Do the donors know about innovative, local NGOs? Are there trusted elements in the ecosystem that can assess the validity or the feasibility or the success of these innovations? So I think that's an important sort of level to work at, because investing in innovation without a functioning ecosystem makes it really hard to scale, and really hard for those solutions to find their clients, their future kind of investors, and so on. So that's one level, and I think for that you just need to sort of look at, do a lot of mapping, be at the center of that ecosystem, and understand how it works, and analyze the different connections. So on the innovation side, what we found, so I came from the humanitarian side, where you're measuring, everything is about like impact, and
Right.
it's about what change are you creating, what are your outputs, your outcomes, your intermediate results, impact, and so on. But if you looked at when we came across people that were coming from innovation incubators or accelerators, they were taught that basically uptake was like what investors and people who were going to assess their success were looking at. So we had a case in Somalia, for instance, where we were working with a fantastic health tech company called Ogo Health, and we did a first pilot with them, and they have a really great electronic medical record system that lets mothers and follow the immunization schedules during pregnancy and during the childhood of their kids from hospital, from health center to health center in a nomadic setting. Really fantastic, and it was going to solve a lot of problems when it came to immunization rates, to early child mortality and so on. But when we got to the pilot phase, like we saw, and they had selected their own indicators. It was all about how many users were in the system, how many sort of data points, how many sort of files were inputted, how many facilities had used the system, how many people had viewed the dashboard. That's all great, but it doesn't tell you anything about the health of the mother or the child. And so what we ended up working with, and we ended up developing a whole toolkit based on that, is to realize that you need both. You can't just say, that doesn't matter. Your number of users doesn't matter. Your potential income doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It matters enormously for feasibility, for people to want to invest in you and to believe in you. But if you're going to go for social impact, and if you're going to go for funding from these more traditional donors, you need to also show what actual changes are you creating for the lives of people. And so, we've had to develop this sort of whole approach where you do both. And you also, as a third part, you're also getting a lot of feedback from users and from people who benefit from the innovation. Again, that's something that the private sector does quite well, actually, in getting this continuous kind of feedback mechanisms. But we have to incorporate that as well into these kind of programs to be truly comprehensive.
Absolutely. And now talking about, we are looking into the measuring the success of innovation from M&E toolkit and so some of these tools. Now talking about what do you think are the enablers for innovation? One is partnership, of course, right? Then we look into different aspects. So if you have to say 1, 2, 3, these are the enablers for innovation from your perspective, from the global perspective, then what would those enablers be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for us, the one thing that has been the key is trust, and right. It's both simple and incredibly complex. If the parties don't trust each other, they feel that a joint venture is not going to be, the benefits of a joint venture aren't going to be evenly split, then problems will inevitably arise. And there is no shortcut really to this, especially when you have kind of when you're working in these prolonged emergencies that have been going on for decades, and people have seen a lot of international programs that have come and go. They've come across many very promising solutions that end up not really working.
Right.
That you have to overcome that, and I think you do that through, you have to do that through, again, time is a key element of this. Personal networking. I think the personal element is a huge enabler in overcoming, the trust barrier, and also, creating these potential connections and having, bringing the right people to the table together. So that's why for us it's been very important to have actual teams on the ground, not I think initially I was interested because initially we thought Matchmaker could work as kind of a semi-automated platform where people would tap in their problems and beep, beam, boop, AI, all these magical things would suggest solutions. And we realize now, you can have an AI system, and there's some already out there that can connect based on needs. But if the two people don't know each other, if they have a bad history working together, then that partnership isn't going to work. So putting yourself in the middle of that, understanding the motivations, being able to get people to change things. So one of the examples, if you look at a standard contract from a humanitarian NGO, almost all the time, if they're funding the development of a tool, of a system, of a service, they're going to own all the IP, the intellectual property. That's right. Like the standard, SOP, the standard operating procedure. That can't work if somebody's trying to sell their solution to multiple agencies. If the second they get their first client, they have to give up all their property. That's never going to work. So you have to work with the NGO side to make exemptions to the contract, to make sure that the innovator's protected. You have to work with the innovator for them to understand that the NGO is going to need a lot of assurances when it comes to how the money is spent. So that, again, takes time. It takes people getting involved and getting to know each other and talking to each other to clarify things. But I think overall that is the enabler. And if you don't do that, then that becomes your main roadblock, I think, to success.
So trust and patience as well, right? Because
trust, patience, and people. Yeah.
Because you have to deal with so many actors at the same time. There's a conventional way of doing things. Of course, these systems are placed to protect certain things and also to remain accountable with donors, but at the same time, protecting the IP of the local innovators are also really important. So trust, okay, that's one of the thing what our listener will be definitely taking into consideration, or of course we all need to work around it. Also, like when we talk about the enabler, now let's talk about the barriers as well, because there are like multiple barriers. As you said, whenever we think about these countries, then we start with the problem, but there are like so many solutions. Of course, there are some preoccupied mindset we start with, as well as the policy level, and there are so many barriers, right? So from your perspective, again, from that bird eye view, right, like what do you see as some of the major roadblocks in this process of local innovation?
I mean, I think one of the issues, and I think, as you know, this is a global conversation, about localization,
right?
And I mean, it's a very loaded, I think, conversation. I mean, many people refer to it as like, the sort of, neo-colonial or neo-colonialism.
Right.
And I think there's some definite elements in there. I think it's more helpful sometimes to think about a decentralization, because one of the biggest issues is that the system as it is very much top down, and the decisions are often made very far away from the places where the solutions are needed. And so I think one of the barriers that we've seen is that, you're working with, it's quite hard to have bottom-up solutions scale, because the systems themselves, the social services systems, the humanitarian systems are themselves very top-down. So you have long-term strategic plans. You have, obviously, you absolutely want to work with national authorities and ministries who have, again, multi-year plans on the educational sector, health sector, and so on. But often these plans are built in a way where there's not going to be much flexibility. Like the solutions are going to come either from the national ministries, but oftentimes as well are going to be decided along with international organizations that are going to say, I mean, obviously the World Bank being the sort of supreme example when they were doing their restructuring programs of like, you're going to do this way, this is what your next 5 years are going to look like. So that is a challenge, and I think it's important I think it's also why it's important to operate in multiple levels. So you have to work at the grassroots level to help these solutions take root locally and succeed locally. But you also need to do a lot. Organizations like World Vision, Save the Children, UN agencies, and so on also have to be active at the national level to create that space to say, okay, well, maybe we didn't include this digital school attendance solution in our plans for the next 5 years, but this really does seem like it's having positive impact. So let's make some amendments. Let's create that space to make sure that it helps reach the total objectives. Because I think anything, I mean, certainly, usually the objectives are sound, and but they are often linked to processes that become very rigid. And that make it more difficult to innovate, for innovation to flourish.
Right, because innovation is more like a water, right? It is very fluid. At the same time, we are operating in an industry which is more rigid, right? So having the right balance between, the new kind of thing as well as the traditional bits is always challenging, and that's where a lot of partnership is required. And as you rightly mentioned, it's all about trust as well, because this is where because I think when I was talking to Duas, he said something around it's more about we have to deliver, and that is one of the basis of ensuring that the innovation happens, and this is really important as well. Now of course, innovation fails, right? And this is really interesting bit, and we do quite a lot around Fail Fest as well. And this is something which I really like, basically, because coming from this culture where failure is a kind of no-no, right? Especially in a country like Nepal, failure is like a kind of a no-no, right? And in other part of the world, like failure is celebrated. And can you give us some example of like innovation in humanitarian sector which badly failed, and what can be the lesson learned for other people who are listening to this podcast?
So in the spirit of Failfest, instead of pointing the finger at somebody else, I'm going to point it to me.
Right.
I think some of our biggest failures have been in the beginning, assuming that that a successful pilot would lead to scaling if we only shouted loud enough that it was successful.
Right.
And I think that what we learned from that, and I think a lot of the initial work that we've done through the matchmaking and through some of the challenge funds as well, they led to sometimes less successful, sometimes quite successful pilots. But we came often to a point, and I think we were the only ones coming to a point where the pilot's over and you're ready to move on, but then things kind of grind to a halt because you don't have the next level of funding is not available, or you don't know who else is going to adopt this solution. And I think it really, I think we let quite a few innovators down by not thinking one step ahead. And I think that's what we internalized. That's a lesson we took away from this is you have to think 2 steps ahead whenever you're working in an innovation process. If you're piloting, it's not enough to identify who's going to fund and who's going to adopt, experiment with a pilot for now. You have to you got to get people interested about the next phase. You got to get people to say, well, okay, I don't want to pilot now. I'm not sure about it. I don't have the funds right now. But, if you're successful, then we'll definitely look into, adopting it if you can show us that it works. That was the key to sort of unlocking that scaling problem in places like in Somalia, for instance. World Vision kind of took the lead in doing very small scale pilots. World Vision is the one that hosts the lab through a consortium called Summeril in Somalia, but they were willing to try things out. But they also had, lined up other NGOs like Save the Children, CARE, UNICEF, to be prepared to move things forward if the results were good. And so by starting in, a few health facilities, a few schools, but getting good evidence, and then getting people to go from 3 to maybe 20 of these locations, and then getting, and always also keeping the ministries informed so that they, maybe it wasn't part of their plan, but they could see that something was happening, that we were sharing information with them, and that this could be a way for them to meet their objectives that maybe wasn't in the books, that wasn't in the plan, but that could actually provide success. And so that was one of the key lessons for us to act. It's a lot of work, and you have to have that constant kind of networking, and that's why that functioning ecosystem is so important. People need to be constantly engaged, and that helps then, I think the bigger thing that it taught us was that we are now fully committed to horizontal scaling as opposed to vertical scaling, because that's how you're going to solve something at the response level. If it's just one organization, if all the scaling is going to be done through a single organization, okay, that's great. For that organization, it's great for the people that are served by that organization, but the idea is that you want to work across a whole humanitarian response. And there's, no matter how big an NGO is, it's never going to be one organization isn't going to be the key to everything. It's not going to solve the problem for everyone. So how do you get a solution that's working, that UNICEF has worked with, for instance, that's functioning? How do you get that to be implemented through, Oxfam, CARE, Save the Children, the national ministries, local NGOs? If you can do that, then you can really, have full impact at the national response level. And to do that, you need to constantly connect with people, and again have that that trust environment, that enabling environment to make it happen.
Right. So in this conversation, there's a lot of common theme of collaboration is coming, right? Because we're working with different actors, and now when I think about donors, because this is where you work more closely with. Of course, you work with other stakeholders closely with as well, for example, with a lab like us as well. But at the same time, how do, from your perspective, donor perceive innovation as, how do they see innovation in their, understanding, as well as how they want to frame innovation in their priority?
I don't think there's any sort of uniform way that donors are looking at it. I think there's great variety in how they conceive of it. Sometimes, some donors see it as a way to boost, social entrepreneurship in general. There's a strong, sometimes private sector kind of component where, in societies where there's high unemployment, encouraging people to launch their own businesses, to pursue their idea can be a way to kind of solve this livelihood, economic development issues. So some of that funding, some of that investment has that sort of lens. Other donors, I think, have much more thematic priorities where they see that, in order to reach certain objectives in the health space, in the shelter space, and so on, you're going to need new insights, you're going to need new ideas, new technologies. So I think that's another sort of component. And other times, there's also the reform agenda, that innovations are going to be a way to transform how the humanitarian system functions. A lot of people, if you look at the grand bargain, the idea is to make the whole way humanitarian responses happen and work is to localize them, to give more say-so, more of a voice for communities. And you're going to do that through policy reform, but you're also going to need distinct innovations along the way to make a new system function. So I think there's a great deal of variety. I do see, as a trend, I think you are seeing very encouragingly. I think I mentioned 5-6 years ago, you still had this idea of developing kind of global solutions that were going to be kind of that could spread everywhere. I think that's really shifted in the last few years, where more and more donors want to invest in more and more local. So now I think you see quite a bit of interest in community-led innovation, in youth, getting young people to be trained on entrepreneurship, on human-centered design, on tech, so that they can that bottom-up approach can be strengthened. I think what we say is that we try to also encourage them to invest in that ecosystem, and that sort of middle, these platforms that will help connect these community innovations and these local, innovation hubs together. But yes, it's been really encouraging to see that shift away from this kind of centralized one-size-fits-all model to this very decentralized, community-based, grassroots, innovation focus.
Oh, great. Brilliant. Now, since we are talking about the donor priorities and how they perceive innovation, can you give us an example? Like if you have to start a new lab in, let's say, XYZ country, how does that process look like? So what do you see at first, right? Like, of course, you'll have a lot of conversation with donors as well as with the local communities as well. So how does the typical process of opening a lab in XYZ country looks like?
Yeah, I don't think there's a necessarily typical way. I think each has been kind of taking a slightly different approach. On paper, first of all, I think that the most important thing when it comes to a decision is whether or not we are we needed and will we be helpful? So I think there's some countries where there's already quite a bit of a highly developed ecosystem. I think it's one of the reasons we're not in Kenya, for instance, where Nairobi is a regional innovation hub, right? With a very there's there's fintech innovation, all sorts of social impact innovation, and it's a community that seems to know each other quite well, and there's a lot of international organizations involved. So would we be adding much value? Probably not in a place like that. The other question is is there enough? However, are there enough local actors that are contributing? Sort of innovations that are ready to go, so to speak, in order for us to create a good connection between the international system and the local system. So in places like maybe perhaps, and I've not been there, so maybe it's an assumption on my part, but like Central African Republic, for instance, would we have enough of a minimum sort of level of local actors that we could connect with international humanitarian actors? Because otherwise I fear that in places like that, all we would do is to take internet to help bring international innovations into that country, and that's not really our strength. The clusters can do that quite well, or in NGO groups. So I think we wouldn't necessarily be as useful as we could be in those kind of settings. So it's kind of finding that kind of Goldilocks, middle ground, that not too developed system, not too under sort of developed, and to be able to kind of move things over a hump, so to speak, to get them to function more autonomously. Now, how we started, sometimes we've been lucky to get donor funding right up from the beginning. So in Somalia, we had a USAID fund to actually, as a sort of what do you call that? Applied research grant to actually try our system in Somalia to see if it works. So we actually were able to launch a full-fledged lab from the get-go. In other places like Uganda and Iraq, we had to go bit by bit. These NGOs, Oxfam in Iraq, Save the Children in Uganda, made small investments to start by doing a mapping and then seeing if there was interest in connecting, and for the ecosystem actors to connect, and then little by little, then delivering some things, and then getting donors interested, and by getting more and more resources as we demonstrated kind of value add. So there isn't a magic sort of system. I think in some ways the hard way sometimes, and I think this is true of all innovators,
right.
Kind of bootstrapping. There's a case to be made for bootstrapping where you're not dependent on a single source of funding to get moving, because if that source, I think many of us in this space know what happened, with the very drastic cuts that FCDO has made in their humanitarian programming. That impacted a lot of actors terribly who depended largely on these grants. We were beneficiaries from FCDO, but fortunately, we also had a mix of other donors, and that allowed us to kind of weather that storm. So in some ways, going, and I think with the labs that we're opening now in Gaza and soon in Syria, that's the road we're going to take. We're going to start small, build interest and build connections, and then go for larger and larger funding.
That's brilliant. Since we have been talking quite a lot around innovation, right? So I've got $1 million question for you. How do you define innovation?
Oh, for me, it's about it's really about, this is $1 million answer. You know it when you see it.
Right. You know when you see it. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I'll send you my wire transfer information in the chat. Really, it's about people willing to do things differently, and treating innovation is about taking a project and sort of dealing with it differently than you would your regular programming. That means you're taking a risk. It means you're going to put more investment into its design, into consulting people. You're going to generate different kinds of evidence. It's about this sort of determined effort to do something different. And I know that's not a very precise definition, but that's the way that's sort of how we look at it. And if people think it's innovation, if they feel like they're innovating, then it's innovation. And it could be new. Maybe it's not something that's groundbreaking, all things considered, but maybe in that particular, for that particular organization, in that particular context, this is something that hasn't been tried before. And so there is a chance that things may not work. And I think that's also a key element, is when you do humanitarian work in particular, you do everything you can to make sure that nothing goes wrong. Of course, you do that when you innovate as well, but you have a lot of evidence to back you up when you do your standard, intervention. Here, you're gonna keep people safe, but you're maybe not sure if you're gonna get the results that you expect. And that leap of faith, that has to be part of the innovation journey. Like if it's not something where, if you're not taking any risks, odds are it's not innovative. It's not really innovative.
Right. Talking about risk, like how do you see the risk appetite in the humanitarian world to go with innovation? Because like for us, sometimes it's more like, okay, this thing is working. Why you guys want to do it differently, right? Like that's something we hear from local actors. And there might be some kind of reputational risk because this might lead to, like some failure, and we don't really want that, right? So those kind of things we have heard from our peers as well, talking about some of the pain points of innovation, especially about basically, the risk element. So from your perspective, working with different INGOs as well as with the UN agencies in this space of innovation, how do you see the risk appetite in this area, especially?
I think it's a bit underestimated. I think there's more willingness. I think that's changed. I think traditionally it's been quite limited, but I think there's been a shift, particularly on the donor side. All the donors I speak with crave innovation. They want to. There's this global realization that we cannot, with the way that the trends are moving in terms of needs and in terms of available resources, doing things through a traditional manner, using, not innovating is not acceptable. And I think that message has really landed at the highest levels. I think sometimes where there is I think in the middle of this chain, so to speak, is where things become harder, because I think people are still very concerned about not, running afoul of the donor and doing something that the donor doesn't want and not delivering for the donor. And I think sometimes that's where the donor may have an appetite, but then the people that interact with the donor may fear, there's still lingering fear, I think, that that's maybe not very true, or that maybe that's that in case of real failure that they're going to get, they're going to be on the hook, so to speak. And let's not forget, I mean, that's the way the system works, is the organization, the prime organization, the organization receiving the funds from the donor is going to be, liable for failure. And so that's a very serious situation. I think over time, I'm hopeful that things will evolve. I think they will evolve, especially through failure. And I think it'll be really interesting to see if some innovations fail, and hopefully, again, they'll fail in generating the expected result, not fail in creating harm for people, because I think that is still completely unacceptable in a humanitarian space. But if there's a failure of reaching goals, I'm hoping the donors will react the way that they say they'll react, which is, you tried, we agreed with taking this chance, and we'll let you try again. Of course, if the donors say, well, you didn't achieve what you told us you might achieve, then you're never going to get our funding again, then that's certainly not going to help at all with loosening up that risk appetite. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the donors are serious about it. The NGOs themselves are investing a lot internally in their innovation system, so they believe in it. And over time, I think you'll see more and more willingness to do things differently.
Definitely. And one of the lessons learned for us has been, sometimes we communicate in a very different way because we have our own set of jargons, as well as, sometimes we sound more techy, and which is kind of different than the regular humanitarian words and, the way of doing things. So right now, what we are also learning over the last 5-6 years is how to simplify things, because once upon a time we used to talk about blockchain, or we were talking about nodes and Ethereum and everything kind of thing, instead of telling people that, it is something that is going to make things much more easier, more secure, and more transparent, right? Because blockchain is all about transparency. So we are more talking like engineers and talking to engineers, right? And then one of the lessons learned for us was also around, that's how we came with board game. One of the things what we have been doing in Nepal, because people thought like innovation is always about technology. Innovation is always about this sophisticated, like mobile application and those kind of bits. So one of the things we wanted to look into is, what if innovation, the people perceive innovation is beyond technology, beyond all these complex settings. So again, like as you said, like there's a gradual shift towards innovation, and there's a lot of things we ourselves needs to do as well, especially educating our peers as well as our donors as well around, innovation is not always all this big thing that is going to change everything together, as you said earlier, right? So not about like applying AI everywhere or applying some magical formula to solve the poverty in the world. That's not possible, but we want to do it step by step. But we want your support in terms of making sure we all co-create together. Now, I've got one more final question for you, and that is more around the sustainability, because innovation brings newness, and there are some cool, exciting projects happening from the ideas to impact. But what about after a certain period of time? For example, the private sectors. It's easy for them, right? Like they refresh their product or services, so they keep becoming more competitive. For example, Apple iPhone 12 Pro Max, or whatever they are, right? But what about the local innovators? How they remain sustainable in the long run?
It's yet another great question, and one I'm not sure I have the full answer to, but I do think that something that they have to decide on their own terms, and that other people shouldn't. It's often easy, I think, for others to try to steer them. And I think you see this all the time in the private sector with, venture capitalists who, invest money into a solution, but then really want to then control, some of the decision making and the strategy and to take that, innovation in a different place. And I think you see that a lot in for social innovations as well, where, as an example, you often see, you could see a grassroots or small kind of startup that has a successful product in Iraq, for instance, and then somebody in, Kenya might hear about it and say, oh, let's use that. Let's get them to come, let them come to Kenya and work on this. And so you're asking a startup to become a multinational, in a matter of months. And that's probably not a great way for them to become sustainable. Right. So, I think we have to be responsible, we as in the international sort of aid sector, or those are in social impact investors, to not to steer not to steer these startups, these social enterprises beyond what they want to achieve. And oftentimes, I mean, they'll want to achieve at the community level first. They want to solve a problem for their own communities, and then maybe they want to move to other similar communities in their countries, and then then perhaps maybe their model isn't to open up a franchise. Maybe at some point they do want to share, go through licensing or become kind of a global center of excellence for this kind of approach or this technology. But that should be on their terms. And we can help. I think there's a lot of help that exists in helping figuring out, what their goal is. I mean, that's part of our M&E toolkit has this idea of what do they want their final impact to be, their ultimate impact of innovation to be. But that really needs to be on their own terms, not on ours. No matter how excited we get and how we see the potential for these solutions and how we want, we know the needs sometimes are global, or we know that there's populations that really could use this right now. But then you have to figure it out, like, how do you fairly then scale that without putting the innovator, their business, their plans at risk? There's often a way, but I think that has to be front and center.
Right. So although I said it was a final topic for discussion, I've got a bonus topic to talk about as well. So it's more about, like, how do you see these emerging technologies, let's say AI, that's what we've been talking quite a lot around, or the blockchain or drone, and how they are going to make an impact in the humanitarian world in the next few years, from your perspective. Because, for example, I think UNICEF has been piloting around drone delivery of essential medicine in Malawi, right? Or, for example, World Vision has been using blockchain for asset transfer, but there are so many things that are happening right now. So how do you see these emerging technologies are going to pave a way, or, pave a foundation for the work of, Response Innovation Lab, as well as different innovators in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, we live in extremely exciting times,
Right.
and there's so much, there's so many, innovations and ideas and technologies that are potentially groundbreaking or already groundbreaking. I think there's unlimited potential, and I don't know. Like, I'm not I wish I could see into the future, and I don't know. I don't know of these technologies which will be the foundation of a new system. Perhaps It will be blockchain. Perhaps it will be, machine learning. Perhaps, drones will become the way that remote communities access, a number of services and sort of goods. I don't know. What I do know is it's not going to work if we don't put that scaling into the hands of the population.
Right.
Because I think the danger, and I hate to close on this kind of doom thing, but I think one of the downsides of this rapid sort of sharing of technologies and the scaling of technologies is that there's a real chance that people get left behind.
Right.
So, and we see this for COVID, where the humanitarian sector, really accelerated the shift to digital delivery of all sorts of services, whether cash or education or even psychosocial, like health. And it's phenomenal because they were able to continue working in at a time where physical travel was nearly impossible.
Right.
But you also created this minimum entry barrier for people to access those services. So they had to be, literate, digitally literate, financially literate. They had to have a device. They had to have connectivity, and so that made life, that helped a certain group of people, but then it also left behind probably the most vulnerable and the hardest to reach. And I think so for those solutions to work, I think they'll grow very quickly through global systems. The question is like how do we in the humanitarian innovation space make sure that their benefits are also accessible to the most vulnerable, and have that the voices of those communities are there when decisions are made about shifting these systems and moving towards these new approaches. That has to be at the center of those discussions.
Brilliant. So thank you, Max, for all the wonderful insights, sharing stories of different innovation that is taking place, as well as the backstory of Response Innovation Lab as well, and a lot of really interesting knowledge which can be really helpful for people who are really excited to know more about what's going on in the humanitarian world and how innovation has been contextualized in different settings. So thanks so much for your time, and thank you for connecting all of us together under Response Innovation Lab. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you, and especially to all the local innovators to connect with different actors in the ecosystem, as well as with donors. So thank you ever so much for all your wonderful work, and I wish you very well for the upcoming exciting and challenging future.
Oh, thank you. So it's very kind of, I was very happy to have this conversation. I'm even more happy to have you as part of the Nepal Innovation Lab and Lab as part of our global network. And yeah, if listeners are interested, they can visit responseinnovationlab.com and see some of our tools. We'll be refreshing our website soon. And we're keen to work with everyone to develop these humanitarian innovation ecosystems and create positive impact for people who are facing crisis.
Thanks so much, Max. Really appreciate your time as well as insight. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zav. Bye.